Welcome to Nightmare Vault, a place where real stories creep from the shadows, reminding us that horror isn't always fiction. Tonight, you'll hear 10 terrifying encounters, true stories that will make you check the locks twice. Let's begin. Story 1. The man behind May was only 15 when I had my first girlfriend. Casey. We lived in a quiet, upper-class neighborhood where the air always smelled of fresh-cut grass, and the streets were lined with perfect little houses. It was the kind of place people thought nothing bad could ever happen. Every night, I'd walk over to Casey's house. The street lamps gave off a pale, orange glow, and the silence made my footsteps echo louder than they should have. One night, halfway to her house, I felt something, a strange pressure at the back of my neck, as if someone was watching me. I turned around. Empty street. My pulse calmed a little, but deep down I knew I wasn't alone. When I finally reached Casey's door, she opened it wide-eyed and whispered, "He was behind you." The whole way here, I froze. She swore she had seen a man walking just a few steps behind me, tall and shadowy, always keeping pace. We called the police. When they arrived, they searched the street, but there was no one, just silence, heavy and endless. But that night changed me forever, because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't hiding in the dark. They're walking right behind you. Story 2. The storm at my window. The night the storm hit, the whole house shook under the weight of thunder. I was sitting on my bed, listening to rain slam against the glass. It was so loud I could barely hear my own breathing. Lightning lit up the room for a split second, and that's when I saw it. A face, pale, pressed against the window pane, grinning at me through the rain. I screamed, but the thunder swallowed the sound. I rushed downstairs to lock the front door and froze. The knob was rattling, moving violently as if someone was trying to force it open. And then I saw it. A glint of metal, like a thin, sharp tool prying at the lock dot. My neighbor, hearing the commotion, called the cops. Red and blue lights flashed across the wet street within minutes. But by the time the police arrived, the man was gone, vanished, like he was never there. To this day, when it storms at night, I can't stop myself from checking every lock. Twice. Story 3. The voice in the basement when I was a kid. I spent a lot of time watching TV in the living room, while my mum cooked or worked upstairs. One evening, as cartoons flickered on the screen, I heard her voice calling me from downstairs. "Come here for a second," she said. Her voice was so clear, so normal, that I started to get up without thinking. But just as I reached the stairs, my mum appeared at the top landing, holding a laundry basket. She frowned and asked, "Who are you talking to?" I froze. My skin went cold. Because if my mum was upstairs, then who had just called me from the basement? From that day forward, I never trusted that dark space under the house. And sometimes, late at night, when the heater clicks on, I swear I can still hear someone whispering my name from below. Story 4. My grandpa's evening walk. My grandpa lived alone on a farm, miles away from the nearest neighbor. The kind of place where nights were pitch black, and the only sounds came from crickets and the wind cutting through the fields. One evening, he leashed up his German shepherd, Sherry, for a walk. They followed the dirt road that wound along the tree line. Halfway through, Sherry stopped, ears perked, low growl rumbling in her chest. Grandpa squinted into the shadows and saw a figure tall, hooded, standing perfectly still between the trees. Grandpa called out, "Who's there?" But the figure didn't move. Instead, He began walking toward them, slowly, deliberately. When the man suddenly broke into a sprint, Sherry lunged, barking ferociously. Grandpa yanked out the small can of pepper spray he carried, and just as the man closed in, he sprayed. The stranger screamed, clawing at his face, before disappearing into the dark woods. Police searched, but they never found him. Grandpa never walked that road again without a gun on his hip, and Sherry never stopped watching the tree line. Story 5. The Abandoned House. I grew up in California, in a neighborhood where gangs marked their territory with spray paint and broken windows. One afternoon, my friend Stevie D dared me to sneak into an old abandoned house at the end of the block. The place reeked of mildew and rot. Floorboards sagged under our feet, and broken glass crunched with every step. We laughed nervously, acting brave, until Stevie pointed at something in the corner of a dusty room. At first I thought it was a mannequin head, but as I stepped closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't plastic. It was real. A human head, half rotted, with eyes clouded white. We bolted. 2 days later, a group of Crips approached us. One leaned in close and whispered, "You didn't see anything. Understand?" We nodded, and we never spoke of it again. But to this day, when I pass an abandoned house, I don't see empty walls. I see that face staring back at me. Story 6. The Men in the Van. It was around 9 p.m. when a knock came at our front door. My mom opened it just a crack. A man stood there, holding an empty Clorox bottle. His voice was calm, polite even. "Hi, could I borrow some bleach?" I spilled something. Something felt wrong. Mum shook her head, saying she didn't have any, and closed the door. But curiosity got the better of her, and she peered through the window. At the end of the driveway sat a van. Inside were 5 men, all watching the house. Waiting, Mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed her pistol, opened the door again, and stepped onto the porch, firearm visible in her hand. The men in the van started the engine immediately, peeling off into the night. The cops later told us it was likely a setup, a planned home invasion. If Mom hadn't trusted her instincts, none of us would have survived that night. Story 7. Backcountry. Terror. My friend Hugh and I loved skiing in the backcountry. No trails, no people, just us and the snow. One trip, we split up for a short while. When Hugh didn't come back, I started to worry. I spotted movement ahead, a skier in Hugh's jacket. Relieved, I shouted his name. But as the figure turned, my stomach twisted. It wasn't Hugh. The man's face was unfamiliar, his smile too wide. He claimed Hugh had gone back to camp and that his wife was nearby. But when I turned my back, I felt a sudden rush. The stranger lunged, knife flashing in his hand. I stumbled, barely dodging the blade. I fired my flare gun into the air, desperate. The loud crack echoed across the valley. In the distance, I heard the rotors of a rescue helicopter. The man froze, then vanished into the trees, leaving Hugh's gear scattered in the snow. Hugh was found hours later, alive but shaken. But the man, no trace. No footprints, just empty white silence. Story 8. The Girl Next Door in college. I rented a small place just blocks from the bars. One night, while heading home, I spotted my neighbor, a young girl, stumbling along the sidewalk, clearly drunk. She wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, too close, stroking her hair like they were lovers. But her expression was dazed, confused, almost fearful. Something in me snapped. I shouted across the street, making as much noise as possible. The man stiffened, glanced at me, then bolted into the shadows, leaving her swaying on her feet. Weeks later, the police showed me a sketch of a suspect caught attacking another girl nearby. My blood ran cold. It was him, the same man from that night. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't yelled. Story 9. Craigslist basement. Craigslist is full of weird people. But one ad seemed harmless. A cheap ping pong table. The seller invited me to his house late in the evening. When I arrived, he insisted we move it into the basement to load it. The basement door was cracked open. The air that drifted out smelled damp and metallic, like rust or blood. Then I noticed something taped to the wall inside. Polaroid photos. Each one showed people tied to chairs. Some looked terrified. Some looked unconscious. I backed away, stammering an excuse, then bolted for my car. The seller didn't chase me. He just stood in the doorway, watching. Days later, police raided the house. The photos were real. The basement was real. And the people, some were never found. Story 10. Cody and Agnes. When I was 14, I babysat a boy named Cody. He was quiet, polite, always clutching his teddy bear. One night, while his parents were out, I heard his toys activate by themselves. Little cars moving, action figures speaking in mechanical voices. Cody didn't look scared. He just whispered, "Agnes is here." I laughed nervously, asking who Agnes was. He pointed to the closet. My stomach tightened. Moments later, his bedroom door creaked open on its own, hinges groaning in the silence. Cody smiled faintly and said, "Agnes opened it." I locked every door and sat awake until his parents came home. The next morning, they looked at me strangely when I mentioned Agnes. They swore Cody never had an imaginary friend. You've just unlocked tonight's Nightmare Vault. Real stories of shadows, strangers, and things that lurk where we least expect them. Which story chilled you the most? Tell us below, and remember, nightmares don't end when you wake up. They wait for you in the dark. Subscribe for more terrifying tales before it's too late.